There comes a moment in your life when you finally understand that your power was never in how loudly you argued, how clearly you explained, or how deeply you begged someone to see your heart. Your real power was always in your silence, in the strength you held when you stopped chasing people who didn't value your presence, when you stopped justifying yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you, when you stopped believing that love must be earned through effort, noise, and emotional exhaustion. Silence is not emptiness. It is not weakness. It is not giving up. Silence is the moment you step back into yourself. It is the moment you choose dignity over desperation, clarity over chaos, self-respect over approval. And something shifts the second you do it. A quiet rearranging of your inner world, a calm that settles into your bones, a strength that doesn't need to be announced. You simply stop responding, and suddenly everything becomes clearer. Most people don't realize how much power they give away every time they chase someone who doesn't choose them, every time they beg for closure that won't heal them, every time they explain themselves to someone who already decided not to listen. Noise drains you. Noise buries you. Noise makes you forget who you were before people taught you to doubt your own worth. But silence returns you to yourself. When you fall silent, you stop dancing for attention. You stop negotiating your value. You stop proving your intentions. You stop allowing your emotions to be pulled around like a puppet on someone else's strings. And in that stillness, something incredible happens. The world begins to reveal itself. The truth surfaces. The masks fall. The people who took your presence for granted begin to feel your absence like a cold echo in a room they once filled with noise. Those who used your empathy for comfort suddenly confront the emptiness they created. And you finally breathe. This is the heart of Stoicism. Not being emotionless, but being rooted. Not reacting to every slight, but choosing where your energy goes. Not lowering yourself to be understood, but rising quietly above the noise that once swallowed you whole. Your silence becomes your shield, your teacher, your truth-teller. It becomes the boundary no one can cross, the message no one can twist, the strength no one can deny. Before we begin this journey together, do something small but powerful. 1. Say this out loud or write it down. 1% today. I choose silence over self-betrayal. And if this message already resonates with something inside you, take a moment to support this work with a like. And when the episode ends, speak your 1% today habit to yourself, not for anyone else. For you. 1. Silence makes them feel your absence, not just hear your words. There is a kind of silence that isn't passive, isn't weak, isn't empty. It's precise. It's the silence that comes after you've said everything worth saying, after you've given someone every chance to meet you halfway, after you've exhausted every attempt to be understood. It's the moment you finally stop offering your energy to people who only valued you when you were pleading, explaining, or trying to hold everything together. And the instant you withdraw, something shifts. Not in you. You've already felt the shift, but in them, because people rarely appreciate presence, but they always feel absence. The truth no one likes to admit is that your voice becomes background noise to people who assume you'll always be there. They stop hearing you, not because your words lost meaning, but because your availability became predictable. Your effort became routine. Your presence became guaranteed. So they stopped noticing the softness in your tone, the care in your actions, the patience in your responses. But your silence breaks the pattern. It interrupts the comfort they built around your emotional labor. When you step back, you remove something they thought they would never lose, your energy, and energy is louder than sound. Suddenly, they feel the lack of your attention, the absence of your warmth, the echo of your quiet. They start replaying conversations they once dismissed. They begin wondering why your name doesn't appear the way it used to. They look for the messages you stopped sending, the check-ins you stopped offering, the emotional support they once depended on. Your silence forces a reflection that your words never could, and in that reflection they meet themselves, not you. They face their own choices, their own patterns, their own carelessness. They feel the weight of what they took for granted, and sometimes the realization hits too late. Don't underestimate the power of withdrawing without drama. You didn't slam a door. You didn't curse their name. You didn't write a paragraph explaining your value. You simply stopped feeding a connection that was starving you. Stoicism teaches that strength is not always in action. Often it's in restraint, in choosing not to participate, in recognizing that your presence is a gift, not a guarantee, in understanding that silence is sometimes the only language people truly listen to. Your silence doesn't punish them, it reveals them, and it reveals you to yourself. Because the moment you stop chasing, something inside you relaxes. Your chest loosens, your thoughts clear, your emotional world stops depending on someone else's behavior, and you begin to taste the kind of peace that only arrives when you choose yourself over the need to be understood. And maybe this is the first time you realize that your absence speaks a truth your presence never could. 2. In stillness, you hear what noise always drowned out. There comes a moment when you finally get tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the soul-deep exhaustion that comes from constantly explaining yourself, constantly proving your intentions, constantly trying to be heard in places where your voice was never meant to matter. And when that exhaustion reaches its limit, something inside you goes quiet. Not broken, quiet. A different kind of quiet. The kind that feels like a doorway back to yourself. Because when the noise fades, the arguments, the overthinking, the chasing, the trying, you begin to hear something you haven't heard in years. Your own voice. Silence is not the absence of sound. Silence is the presence of clarity. In stillness, the truth rises. You begin to notice the needs you kept suppressing, the boundaries you kept ignoring, the pain you buried under politeness, loyalty, or fear of being abandoned. You start realizing how many times you said, "It's okay," when it wasn't. How many times you forgave behavior that never changed. How many times you took responsibility for someone else's chaos. Noise makes you forget this, because noise keeps you busy. Noise keeps you distracted. Noise keeps you away from yourself. But the moment you stop forcing people to see you, to understand you, to validate you, a different kind of vision emerges. You begin to see yourself clearly for the first time in a long time. You notice the toll emotional chaos has taken on you. You notice how drained you've been. You notice how long you've held on to relationships that were dismantling your spirit piece by piece. And suddenly, you don't want validation anymore. You want peace. And peace doesn't come from others. Peace comes from you returning to yourself. Stoicism teaches that clarity is found not in reaction, but in stillness. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind becomes stronger when it retreats inward, away from external noise. Seneca wrote that silence is a form of wisdom. Epictetus taught that what disturbs us is not events, but our interpretation of them. And silence gives us space to see that difference. Stillness teaches you what noise tried to hide. It shows you who respects your boundaries. It shows you who only loved you when you were easy. It shows you who depended on your silence to selfishly keep taking. It shows you who you've become without even noticing. And as you sit in that stillness, something powerful happens. You begin to unlearn old patterns. You begin to detach from what hurt you. You begin to feel the weight leaving your shoulders. You begin to understand your own value without needing someone else to confirm it. And maybe the greatest gift silence gives you is this: a return to the truth buried beneath the noise, the truth that you matter, the truth that your heart deserves better, the truth that peace is not something you chase, but something you create by stepping away from what disturbs it. And maybe this is the moment your life begins to realign. 3. Seeking closure is often just begging in disguise. There is a moment in every painful connection when you feel an urge, a deep, restless urge, to ask for one more conversation, one more explanation, one more chance to understand why things ended the way they did. We tell ourselves it's about clarity, about healing, about closure. But if we're honest, most of the time, it's not closure we're seeking. It's comfort. It's reassurance. It's the hope that someone who hurt us will somehow fix the wound they created. And that desire, though human, is dangerous, because closure becomes the elegant word we use to avoid admitting that what we really want is to be chosen again. When you ask for closure from someone who already walked away, emotionally or physically, you place your healing in their hands. You ask the same person who ignored your needs to suddenly become considerate. You ask the same person who couldn't communicate to suddenly be honest. You ask the same person who broke your trust to suddenly speak truthfully. And deep down, you already know what's coming: more confusion, more mixed signals, more emotional crumbs. Seeking closure often becomes a softer form of begging, begging to matter, begging to be seen, begging for what someone has already shown they cannot give. But here is the painful truth that liberates you once you accept it. Closure does not come from them. Closure comes from you. Closure is the moment you stop needing answers that won't heal you. Closure is the moment you accept that the past cannot be rewritten. Closure is the moment you realize that someone's inability to love you properly is not an unfinished story. It was the story, and your silence is the period at the end of that sentence. In Stoicism, the idea is clear. You cannot control the actions, thoughts, or choices of others. You can only control your response. And when you stop chasing explanations, you reclaim something sacred: your dignity, your peace, your energy. Because what you really needed was never closure. What you needed was the strength to stop asking. When someone leaves you confused, their silence is your closure. When someone refuses to change, their actions are your closure. When someone shows you who they are, their consistency is your closure. When someone walks away, the empty space they leave behind becomes your closure. You don't heal by reopening the wound through one last conversation. You heal by refusing to let the same hands that hurt you be the ones you depend on to soothe you. And maybe the most empowering realization is this: you don't need their final words. You don't need their explanation. You don't need their validation. Your healing begins when you decide the story is finished, not when they do. Your silence is not abandonment. Your silence is self-respect. And maybe this is the first time you trust yourself enough to let the door close without asking for anything on the way out. 4. Words can dress up lies. Silence undresses truth. There is a certain kind of person who becomes very good at using words as camouflage. People who speak beautifully, promise endlessly and apologize perfectly, yet their actions never shift, their patterns never break, and their behavior never aligns with the poetry that falls from their mouth. And when you are emotionally invested, it becomes easy, painfully easy, to believe the performance. You want to believe their explanations. You want to believe their apologies. You want to believe that this time will be different. But silence. Silence strips away the costumes. Silence exposes what words were covering. Because the moment you stop responding, something revealing happens. Their actions finally stand alone. Without your replies to soften the truth. Without your explanations to fill in the gaps. Without your emotional labor smoothing over the damage. And in that quiet space where your voice no longer cushions them, you begin to see their real nature with startling clarity. Words can hide intentions. Silence reveals them. The person who never cared will disappear the moment you stop feeding them your attention. The person who relied on your forgiveness will panic when the cycle breaks. The person who thrived on drama will try to provoke you once you stop engaging. The person who loved control will feel threatened by your calm. The person who spoke of love but never lived it will fall silent, not because they are hurt, but because they have nothing real to offer. Silence reveals the truth because it removes the stage. In Stoic philosophy, truth is never discovered through emotional reaction. It is revealed in observation, in watching how someone behaves without your participation, without your effort, without your words guiding the interaction. When your silence enters the room, their patterns become unmistakable. You see who shows up, who fades, who fights for clarity, who avoids responsibility, who had substance, and who only had stories. Silence also reveals something deeper, your own truth. You begin to notice what noise drowned out, the discomfort you ignored, the boundaries you kept compromising, the intuition you silenced because you didn't want to lose them, the exhaustion you labeled as love. Your stillness becomes a mirror reflecting not only who they are, but who you became while trying to keep them. It's sobering, it's painful, but it's liberating. The beauty of silence is that it cannot be manipulated, it cannot be twisted, it cannot be argued with, it cannot be guilt-tripped. You remove the tool people use to control, distract, or confuse you, and once the noise is gone, the truth stands naked, simple, undeniable, and often very different from what you wanted to believe. Silence doesn't just reveal the truth, it protects you from the lies, and maybe, for the first time, you realize that the clarity you were searching for in conversations, explanations, and endless discussions was waiting for you in the quiet all along. 5. Not explaining yourself is self-respect in action. There comes a point in your life when you realize that every time you over-explain yourself, you hand over pieces of your dignity. Every time you justify your boundaries, you shrink your own worth. Every time you try to prove that your feelings are valid, you forget that feelings don't need permission to exist. And every time you tell someone why you're walking away, why you're changing, why you're choosing peace, you give them access to a part of you they never deserved in the first place. One of the deepest forms of self-respect is the moment you stop explaining yourself to people who are not interested in understanding you. Because people who respect you don't need explanations, and people who don't respect you won't believe them. Over-explaining is born from fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing someone, fear of disappointing others, fear of being seen as selfish. But that fear keeps you trapped in emotional negotiations you never needed to attend. You find yourself crafting paragraphs to justify decisions that protect your well-being. You start apologizing for having standards. You begin rewriting your truth in softer language so that others won't feel uncomfortable. And slowly, you hand your power away word by word. But when you stop explaining, something powerful happens inside you. Your energy returns, your confidence rises, your decisions feel cleaner, your boundaries become sharper, your self-worth becomes non-negotiable. The truth is, your life is not a courtroom. Your heart is not on trial. Your choices are not open to public debate. You don't owe anyone a detailed defense of why you no longer tolerate disrespect, why you outgrew certain people, why chaos exhausts you, why silence feels better than forced connection, or why walking away felt like the most honest thing you had left. Stoic philosophy teaches that real strength is internal, not reactive, not performative. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Your mind will take the shape of what you frequently hold in thought. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop centering other people's opinions in your mind. You stop giving their judgment a seat at the table of your decisions. You stop shaping your life around what makes others comfortable and begin shaping it around what makes you whole. Not explaining yourself is not coldness, it's clarity. It's knowing that your peace is worth more than someone else's validation. It's understanding that your decisions are yours because your life is yours. It's trusting your intuition without asking others to translate it. And it's the moment you finally understand that people who genuinely care will see your heart in your actions, not in your explanations. So you walk away when you need to walk away. You choose silence when words would betray your truth. You set boundaries without decorating them. You evolve without announcing the process. You prioritize yourself without apologizing. And maybe this is the moment you understand that not explaining yourself is not selfish. It's self-respect in action, lived quietly and confidently without needing anyone to approve it. 6. Detachment without drama is louder than any goodbye. There is a kind of departure that leaves no broken plates, no raised voices, no long messages typed at 2 a.m., no dramatic exits meant to make a point. It is calm, it is quiet, it is steady. It is the kind of leaving that happens after you finally understand your worth, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a clarity so deep it no longer needs to announce itself. You don't slam the door. You simply stop holding it open. This kind of detachment is powerful because it carries no emotional performance. There is no warning, no argument, no attempt to be understood. It's the moment when your heart, tired from being stretched too thin, simply lets go. And that release is far louder than any speech you could have given, because silence, real silence, is unmistakable. It cannot be misinterpreted, it cannot be debated, it cannot be manipulated. When you detach without drama, you communicate the truth people never heard when you tried to speak it. I'm done giving you access to the parts of me you did not value. Drama keeps the cycle alive. Stillness ends it. And the moment you step back without theatrics, without emotional fireworks, without a final plea for decency, the dynamic shifts. People who expected you to react suddenly feel the weight of your non-reaction. People who relied on your emotional intensity suddenly feel the emptiness your silence leaves behind. People who assumed you'd always return begin to realize you were the glue holding everything together. Stoic philosophers understood this deeply. Seneca wrote that true strength is shown in how you leave what harms you, with dignity, without noise. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that peace is found in actions aligned with inner conviction, not in demanding recognition from others. This is the essence of quiet detachment, a decision rooted in self-respect, not in the desire to hurt, shock, or guilt anyone. You don't leave to prove anything. You leave because the noise around you no longer matches the clarity within you. And here's where the real power emerges. Your silence becomes the mirror they cannot escape. Every choice they made, every disrespect they dismissed, every moment they counted on your forgiveness, all of it echoes louder when you stop responding. Those who once treated your patience as weakness suddenly see it was restraint. Those who mistook your kindness for compliance start realizing it was strength. Those who relied on your emotional involvement to keep control lose their grip completely. Your absence becomes the lesson. Your stillness becomes the consequence. Your peace becomes the message. And for people who only understand chaos, your calm is deafening. But the real transformation is what happens inside you. You begin to feel lighter. You begin to breathe again. You begin to reclaim the emotional space that drama once occupied. You begin to see how much energy you had been leaking into situations that did nothing but drain you. And as this clarity settles, you realize you didn't lose anything by leaving. You simply returned to yourself. Quiet detachment is not running away. It is choosing yourself. It is protecting your spirit. It is refusing to participate in cycles that no longer align with your growth. And maybe this is the moment you finally understand that the strongest goodbyes are the ones whispered under your breath, not shouted across a room. The ones marked by dignity, not noise. The ones that free you, not imprison you. 7. Your silence reflects the boundaries they refuse to see. There comes a point when speaking feels like shouting into a void. You repeat yourself. You explain your feelings. You express what hurts you. You try to guide someone toward the parts of you that need care. But they don't listen. Not because your words lack clarity, but because honoring your boundaries would require them to change. And change is something many people avoid until the cost of not changing becomes unbearable. So eventually, you reach the moment that every wounded heart reaches, the moment when silence becomes the only boundary left. Because silence cannot be argued with, it cannot be twisted, it cannot be ignored. When someone continuously crosses your boundaries, minimizes your feelings, dismisses your concerns, takes advantage of your empathy, or expects you to tolerate what chips away at your spirit, your silence becomes the line they finally feel. It is the moment when your absence speaks the truth. Your words could never force them to hear. You have gone too far, and I will not carry the weight of your behavior anymore. Silence is not passive. It is protective. It is the final, undeniable signal that you have withdrawn your emotional access, the access they assumed would always be available. Stoicism teaches that boundaries are not external walls, but internal choices. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that peace comes from keeping your soul untraumatized, which often means stepping back from whatever destabilizes it. Your silence is the embodiment of that wisdom. It says, I refuse to keep explaining what you refuse to understand. And something fascinating happens once you go quiet. People start revealing themselves. Those who respected you all along will reach out with clarity. Those who valued you will ask how to make things right. Those who truly care will listen differently. But the ones who benefited from your lack of boundaries will become angry, confused, or defensive. Not because you wronged them, but because your silence removed the privileges they misused. Your silence forces people to face themselves. It removes the cushion your explanations provided. It highlights their behavior without you having to point a single finger. And the deeper truth emerges. Some people needed your silence to finally understand the weight of their actions. But something else happens too, something even more important. You begin to feel your dignity returning to you. For the first time, you feel the power of honoring your limits without apology. You feel the peace that comes from stepping away instead of fighting to be understood. You feel the strength that rises when you stop negotiating with your own worth. Your silence is not rejection, it's revelation, it's self-preservation. It's your energy saying, "This is where I end and you begin." And maybe it's the first time you realize that boundaries spoken are often ignored, but boundaries lived in silence are impossible to overlook. 8. When you stop chasing, the truth reveals who was never real. There is a moment in every relationship, friendship, romance, family, or any connection built on emotional effort, when you finally stop reaching. You stop texting first. You stop checking in. You stop holding the conversation together. You stop being the emotional anchor. You stop bending yourself into shapes just to keep the bond alive. And in that moment, something deeply revealing happens. You finally see the truth of the relationship, not the version you kept alive with your effort. When you stop chasing, the people who were never real quietly disappear. Not because they're busy, not because they got overwhelmed, not because they needed space, but because your effort was the only thing sustaining the connection. This is one of the hardest revelations to accept, that some people weren't in your life because they loved you, valued you, or cared about you deeply. They were there because you made it easy, because you did the emotional work, because you initiated everything, because you accepted the bare minimum, because you kept the bridge standing even when they offered no support from their side. So when you finally step back, the illusion breaks, and what remains is truth. Stoic philosophy teaches that reality reveals itself when we detach from desire and expectation. Epictetus said, "If you want the truth, hold no preferences." When you stop preferring closeness over clarity, when you stop choosing connection over self-respect, the truth becomes unmistakable. Some people vanish the moment you stop chasing because they were never invested. They only stayed for what they received, not what they shared. They needed your attention to feed their ego. They needed your stability to mask their inconsistency. They relied on your empathy to avoid taking responsibility. And once you remove your energy, they have nothing left to take. But here's the part that hurts. And heals. If someone disappears when you stop reaching, they were never meant to stay. And deeper than that, their disappearance is not a loss. It's a revelation, a cleansing, an unveiling. Because when the wrong people walk out, the right people finally have space to enter. When the false connections dissolve, real ones can be built. When your energy stops leaking into people who never valued it, you finally have the strength to give to someone who recognizes its worth. And something beautiful happens inside you during this process. You realize that not everyone deserves access to your heart. You understand that effort must be mutual. You accept that love without reciprocity is not love. It's longing. You feel your self-worth growing in the empty spaces where you once begged for attention. The truth is this: you don't lose people by stopping the chase. You lose the illusions. You lose the fantasies. You lose the version of them you created in your mind. What remains is reality, pure, unfiltered, honest. And maybe, for the first time, you can finally see who is walking toward you, not because you chased them, but because they choose you on their own. 9. You don't heal by being heard. You heal by being still. There is a deep misunderstanding many people carry through life. The belief that healing requires someone else to acknowledge your pain, validate your experience, apologize for what they did, or finally understand the impact of their actions. We grow up thinking that if the person who hurt us could just see what they've done, if they could explain, if they could say the right words, if they could offer closure, then we would finally feel free. But healing doesn't happen that way. Healing doesn't arrive from someone else's voice. Healing begins in your silence. Stillness is where the emotional storm settles. Stillness is where your nervous system finally gets to breathe. Stillness is where the truth, the one you kept running from, rises to the surface without interruption. Because when you stop chasing explanations, when you stop replaying the story, when you stop arguing with what already happened, a different kind of clarity emerges. A clarity that makes you realize something powerful. You were never waiting for them. You were waiting for yourself. Stillness is where healing begins because it removes the noise. Noise from their excuses, noise from your overthinking, noise from your expectations, noise from the fantasy of who you hoped they would be. In stillness, all of that dissolves, and what remains is you, raw, unfiltered, honest. You begin to hear the parts of your heart that were drowned out by chaos. You begin to recognize the wounds you ignored because confronting them hurt too much. You begin to understand that true healing was never about being heard by others. It was about hearing yourself. Stoic wisdom embraces this truth deeply. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about retreating inward, not as escape, but as restoration. He believed that the mind becomes strongest in silence when it returns to its own reason, its own clarity, its own center. Seneca taught that suffering isn't healed by outward expression alone, but by inward understanding. In silence, you learn what your pain has been trying to teach you. And the deeper lesson is this: you don't heal by expecting someone else to fix what they broke. You heal by choosing to stop bleeding for them. When you are still, you stop reopening the wound with why. You stop reattaching yourself to memories that don't deserve to be relived. You stop waiting for someone to offer you what they're incapable of giving. Your heart begins to make peace with the truth instead of trying to rewrite it. And something shifts inside you, quietly but unmistakably. Your mind stops chasing, your body stops bracing, your emotions stop spiraling. The inner chaos begins to settle like dust after a long storm, because stillness gives you back something you lost, yourself. And maybe the most beautiful part of healing in silence is that no one else gets to take credit for your recovery. No apology created it. No explanation shaped it. No conversation fixed it. You healed because you finally turned inward and met yourself with honesty instead of noise. You healed not by being heard, but by being whole in your own quiet. 10. Silence is power, because it cannot be argued with. There is a kind of strength the world doesn't easily recognize, the strength of someone who no longer reacts, no longer explains, no longer defends, no longer participates in the endless cycle of emotional tug-of-war. It's the strength of someone who has learned that silence is not withdrawal, it's elevation. It is the quiet, unshakable refusal to let chaos pull you into battles where nothing grows except exhaustion. Silence is powerful because it leaves no openings. People can twist your words, misinterpret your tone, argue with your emotions, or weaponize your vulnerability. But they cannot twist what you never said. They cannot argue with a void. They cannot debate a calm heart. They cannot fight someone who refuses to step into the ring. Your silence becomes a wall no manipulation can climb, no guilt can penetrate, no anger can destabilize. And when you stop explaining yourself, a strange thing happens. People are forced to face their own actions without the distraction of your reaction. The person who depended on provoking you suddenly has nothing to feed on. The person who thrived on turning arguments into control loses their grip. The person who counted on your words to ease their conscience has no comfort left. Silence exposes everything because it removes the noise that once hid the truth. This is why Stoic philosophers considered silence a form of discipline, a way to protect the mind from being dragged into unnecessary battles. Epictetus taught that what others say is outside your control, and reacting only fuels what you're trying to escape. Marcus Aurelius wrote that restraint, not expression, is where the mind finds its strength. Your silence becomes a shield, not passive, but intentional, deliberate, rooted in the understanding that your peace is worth more than any argument. And there is another layer, deeper and more personal. Silence reconnects you to yourself. When you stop wasting energy correcting people who choose not to understand you, you reclaim that energy for something better, for clarity, for healing, for growth, for inner steadiness. Your silence becomes the space where your nervous system resets, where your intuition speaks, where your heart finally has room to breathe. You realize how many battles you once entered out of habit, not necessity. You begin to see how much noise you tolerated because you didn't yet believe you deserved peace. The beauty of silence is that it matures you. It strengthens your emotional muscles. It teaches you the difference between what deserves your voice and what only deserves your silence. It shows you that peace is not something you chase. It's something you protect. And here is the real power. Silence cannot be manipulated. It cannot be guilt-tripped. It cannot be pulled into drama. It cannot be turned against you. Your words could be used unfairly, but your silence remains yours. And perhaps the moment you truly understand this is the moment you stop fearing what silence means to them and start embracing what it means for you. Your silence is not emptiness. It is intention. It is strength. It is self-control. It is self-respect. It is your declaration that your energy is sacred and not everyone has earned access to it. And maybe silence is the one language that teaches people the truth you could never explain with words. 11. Your quiet becomes the loudest lesson they'll ever learn. There is a moment, after the frustration, after the confusion, after the endless cycles of trying to be understood, when your silence becomes the one thing they can no longer ignore. At first, they mistake your quiet for weakness. They assume you're done speaking but still listening. They assume you're hurt but still hoping. They assume you're waiting for them to come back with better words. They underestimate the depth of your stillness until they finally feel it. Silence is not the absence of love. Silence is the presence of self-worth. And when your self-worth rises, your quiet becomes a mirror that reflects everything someone refused to see when you were speaking. The patience you gave, the loyalty you offered, the effort you poured into the connection, the emotional labor you carried alone. They feel for the first time the weight of everything you once held for them. Because silence does something no lecture, no confrontation, no long message could ever do. It forces people to sit alone with the truth. Your quiet highlights their choices, their inconsistencies, their excuses, their dismissiveness, their carelessness, their selfishness disguised as love. All the things you once tolerated now echo around them in the empty space where your voice used to be. And what hurts them the most, though they will never admit it, is realizing that your silence didn't come from anger. It came from clarity, the clarity that they cannot give you what you deserve, the clarity that staying would mean shrinking, The clarity that continuing the cycle would cost you more than it could ever offer, and clarity is final in a way words never are. In Stoicism, silence is a teacher. It teaches both sides. It teaches you that peace is your natural state once you stop fighting unnecessary battles. And it teaches them that access to you was a privilege, one they mismanaged. Your stillness becomes a lesson written in bold. I will no longer abandon myself to keep you comfortable. And that lesson hits harder than any argument could. Because when they replay the story, and they will, they won't remember the moments you tried to explain. They won't remember the times you forgave. They won't remember the times you gave them infinite chances. They will remember the silence. The moment you stopped responding. The moment your energy vanished. The moment your absence filled the room stronger than your presence ever did. Your quiet becomes the ending they never expected. The kind of goodbye that doesn't slam a door, but closes it with certainty. A goodbye that carries dignity instead of drama. A goodbye they cannot twist, cannot reinterpret, cannot use against you. And that permanence, that simplicity, that finality is what stays with them. But the most beautiful part is this. Your silence isn't meant to teach them a lesson. It's meant to free you. And somewhere in that freedom, without even trying, your quiet becomes the loudest truth they will ever hear. There comes a certain peace, a rare, quiet, grounded peace, when you finally stop giving your energy to the places that drain you, when you stop chasing people who already chose to leave, when you stop begging for clarity from those who enjoy your confusion, when you stop explaining yourself to minds that were never interested in understanding you in the first place. And in that silence, something inside you begins to rebuild itself, slowly, strongly, almost imperceptibly at first, until one day you realize you are no longer the same person who pleaded, who overgave, who carried the emotional weight of every relationship on your own shoulders. Your silence becomes the beginning of your transformation, not the cold kind, not the resentful kind, but the kind that rises from deep self-respect, the kind that whispers, "I choose myself now." You start to feel your spirit standing taller inside you. Your breath becomes steadier, your thoughts calmer. The noise that once filled your mind softens into something manageable, almost distant. You begin to understand that healing is not about winning arguments, or being right, or proving your worth to anyone. Healing is the quiet decision to stop abandoning yourself in order to be chosen by people who never intended to stay. And as the days pass, you notice how different life feels when your peace becomes your priority. You stop reacting to every slight. You stop jumping at every message. You stop absorbing every emotion that doesn't belong to you. You start watching life with a clearer gaze, unclouded by the desperation to be understood, loved, or validated. Your silence becomes a sanctuary, a gentle space where you rebuild your strength from the inside out, without permission, without apology. The people who were meant for you will feel the difference, not because you said anything, but because you stopped saying everything. And the people who were never meant for you will drift away, not because you pushed them, but because your silence no longer feeds their ego. Your absence reveals what your presence once concealed, the truth of every connection, the reality behind every mask, the sincerity of every heart. And somewhere in the middle of all this quiet, you meet yourself again, the self you lost trying to keep others happy, the self you buried under over-explaining and over-caring, the self who knew her worth before life taught her to question it. You begin to move differently, not with pride, but with certainty, not with coldness, but with clarity. You choose what nourishes you. You walk away from what wounds you. You protect what matters, and you let silence do the rest. This is your turning point. This is where your power begins, not in the noise, but in the quiet. So, as you leave this episode, carry one truth gently with you. You are not defined by those who failed to see your worth. You are defined by the moment you stopped asking them to.